Memphis, May 1982, 8:47 p.m. Mae Young was 60 years old and she'd been professional wrestling for 41 years. She'd started in 1941 when professional wrestling was something you did in barns and small-town gymnasiums for $50 and a meal after the match. She'd worked her way up to the biggest promotions in the world. She'd been wrestling in the ring longer than most of the people watching her tonight had been alive. Young was 60 years old. She had hands that had thrown women twice her size, and a mind that understood professional wrestling the way a chess master understood chess. She understood psychology. She understood how to make a crowd believe something was real, even when they knew it was performance. She understood that wrestling wasn't about raw power, it was about control, about knowing exactly where your opponent's balance was and exactly how to disturb it. She was 5'6". She weighed 130 pounds. She had hands that had thrown women twice her size, and a mind that understood professional wrestling the way a chess master understood chess. She understood psychology. She understood how to make a crowd believe something was real, even when they knew it was performance. She understood that wrestling wasn't about raw power, it was about control, about knowing exactly where your opponent's balance was and exactly how to disturb it. Mae had wrestled 687 matches across 4 decades. She'd won 514 of them. She'd been wrestling champion in 13 different promotions. She'd trained more wrestlers than anyone else in the industry. She had records and credentials and a reputation that preceded her into every ring she entered. The reputation was this: Mae Young didn't wrestle like a woman. She wrestled like someone who understood violence so completely that she could make it look choreographed while actually delivering genuine consequences. She could make a throw look gentle and powerful at the same time. She could make submission holds look impossible to escape. She could make getting thrown look like it was the worst thing that had ever happened to someone. Tonight there was an NBC television crew in the Memphis Coliseum. They were filming a special on professional wrestling for primetime television. They wanted authentic wrestling, real competition, the kind of matches that made people believe something was actually at stake. Mae Young was headlining the evening. She was wrestling a younger competitor, a woman from the Midwest who'd won 23 straight matches and who'd been getting increasingly confident about her abilities. The younger woman was confident. The crowd was electric. Approximately 2,400 people had come to the Memphis Coliseum to watch wrestling on a Tuesday night in May. What nobody in that crowd knew was that Mae had extended an invitation to someone specific to attend that evening's event. An invitation that had been accepted. Chuck Norris was in Memphis because he was competing in a national karate tournament that weekend. He'd flown in that morning from Dallas. He'd trained that afternoon at the venue, 6 hours of preparation and sparring with other tournament competitors. He'd eaten dinner with his coach and some other competitors at a local steakhouse. His coach, a man named Robert, who'd traveled with Chuck for 15 years and who'd been instrumental in his competition career, had suggested they catch an evening wrestling match while they had the chance. "It's different from karate," Robert said over dinner. "It's worth seeing how other martial artists approach combat. Professional wrestling isn't what most people think it is. It's controlled, yes, but it's also technically sophisticated. You can learn something from watching Mae Young." Robert knew who Mae Young was. He'd been following professional wrestling for decades. He knew her record. He knew her reputation. He knew that Mae Young was probably the most dangerous professional wrestler in the country. Not because she was the strongest, she wasn't, but because she understood the physics of the human body better than almost anyone who'd ever stepped into a wrestling ring. Robert had met Mae once at a wrestling event in the 60s. She'd impressed him not with strength, but with precision. Chuck had agreed to go. They'd gotten tickets to the Memphis Coliseum wrestling event. They were sitting in the 3rd row when Mae Young came down to the ring for the main event. The crowd reaction to Mae was immediate and powerful. Not cheers exactly, but recognition. People stood up. People knew they were watching someone important. Mae had been in that business for longer than most of them had been alive, and she carried that history with her into the ring. Chuck watched Mae Young get into the ring. He watched how she moved up the stairs. He watched her hands as she gripped the ropes. He watched her footwork as she stepped into the ring. Everything was economical, nothing wasted, everything purposeful. Robert leaned over to Chuck. "That's Mae Young," Robert said. "She's been wrestling for 40 years. She's the best technical wrestler in the business. Her understanding of leverage and balance is better than anyone I've ever seen. If anyone truly understands combat, it's her. Her opponent came out to tremendous crowd response. The younger woman was muscular and confident. She'd trained well. She'd won 23 matches in a row. She believed she was going to win. The ring announcer began the introductions. And then Mae Young looked directly at Chuck in the third row. She saw him. She knew who he was. She'd made arrangements specifically to have him in the crowd. She walked over to the edge of the ring where Chuck was sitting. The crowd was confused. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't how wrestling events were supposed to proceed. "You," Mae said. She pointed directly at Chuck. Her voice was strong and clear and carried across the arena. "The Karate Man, the tournament fighter. You think you could last 30 seconds in this ring with me?" The crowd went absolutely silent. The television crew suddenly shifted focus. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't choreographed. This was something new and something real. Chuck didn't answer immediately. He just looked at Mae. He could see her clearly from the third row. He could see her age and her size and her confidence. He could also see something else. The way she carried herself suggested she understood something about leverage and balance that most people didn't understand. Robert grabbed Chuck's arm tightly. His voice was urgent. "Don't," Robert said. "Don't do this. You don't understand. Mae Young is not someone you play games with. She's not like regular wrestlers. She's not performing in the way most wrestlers perform. She understands the human body better than anyone I've ever seen. She understands leverage and balance at a level that transcends wrestling. Don't accept this. Walk away. Don't accept this challenge." "She's challenging me," Chuck said. His voice was calm and thoughtful. "That's the point," Robert said. "That's exactly the point. She wouldn't challenge you unless she believed she could win. She's not arrogant. She's confident because she understands something. Don't accept it, please." Mae was still waiting at the edge of the ring. She was looking at Chuck with absolute certainty. She believed, she knew, that 30 seconds in her ring would be more than Chuck could handle. Chuck stood up slowly. He stood up in front of 2,400 people and an NBC television crew. "I accept," he said. The crowd erupted, not with cheering, but with confusion and excitement. This wasn't wrestling. This was something else entirely. Robert buried his face in his hands. Chuck climbed into the ring. The television crew adjusted their positioning. NBC was still recording. They didn't know what to do with this, but they knew it was important to document it. They knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. A professional wrestler and a martial artist were about to meet in a wrestling ring under wrestling rules. Mae Young circled Chuck. She wasn't moving fast. She was moving precisely. Every step calculated, every movement intentional. The crowd was completely silent now. They understood they were watching something important. The young woman who'd been Mae's scheduled opponent had gotten out of the ring and was standing at the edge, watching like everyone else. Think about what Mae Young understood that Chuck didn't know about wrestling. She understood that wrestling wasn't about strength or speed. It was about leverage. It was about knowing the exact point of your opponent's balance and controlling it. It was about understanding how the human body could be bent and folded and positioned. It was about making someone submit not because they were tired, but because the position they were in made resistance impossible. Mae threw her first move. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a kick. It was a collar and elbow tie-up. The fundamental wrestling position where both combatants grab each other's neck and shoulder area. It's the beginning of almost every wrestling match in the world. It's the foundational position from which all wrestling technique flows. Mae's hands came up toward Chuck's neck and shoulder. What happened next would be the reason NBC deleted the footage. Chuck saw the trajectory of Mae's hands, and he understood what she was attempting. He understood leverage. He understood balance. He understood how the human body worked. And in the moment that Mae committed to her move, Chuck responded with the simplicity of someone who understood something she didn't understand about control. Chuck stepped backward, and his body adjusted angles by maybe 8 degrees. Mae's hands met empty space. Her momentum carried her forward and past Chuck, and suddenly she was off balance in a way that wrestling didn't usually involve, because wrestling was choreographed and controlled, and this wasn't. Chuck's hand came up and made contact with the pressure point where Mae's shoulder met her trapezius, the same nerve cluster that could temporarily disable someone's arm. Not hitting, not striking. applying pressure at exactly the right angle. Mae's legs went out from under her. She hit the mat hard. The crowd didn't know what they'd just seen. They went silent because something had happened that didn't match their understanding of wrestling. Chuck stepped back. He didn't celebrate. He didn't say anything. He just waited to see what Mae would do next. What Mae did was stay on the ground for 6 seconds. 6 seconds while her nervous system processed what had happened. Her arm was useless. Not permanently, the nerve compression was temporary, but in that moment, she couldn't move it. She couldn't function properly. She couldn't continue. She got up slowly. She looked at Chuck. There was no anger in her face. There was understanding. She'd challenged someone thinking she understood the context completely. She'd been wrong. She'd misunderstood what she was facing. Mae got out of the ring. The timer had been running for exactly 13 seconds. The Memphis Coliseum erupted. The crowd didn't know what they'd seen. The television crew didn't know what to do. The commentators were trying to explain something that didn't make sense in the context of professional wrestling because it wasn't professional wrestling. It was something else entirely. Robert was standing now, his face shocked, his hands over his mouth. The young woman who was supposed to have wrestled Mae came over to Chuck. "What did you do?" she asked. "What was that? That wasn't wrestling. What was that?" Chuck didn't answer. He climbed out of the ring and walked back toward his seat while the entire arena processed what had just happened. Robert looked at him. "What did you just do?" Robert asked. "I responded to what she was attempting," Chuck said. His voice was calm. He wasn't breathing hard. His pulse was normal. He sat down like nothing significant had just happened. "Mae Young is one of the greatest wrestlers who ever lived," Robert said. "And you just put her on the ground in 13 seconds without actually wrestling her." "I didn't put her anywhere," Chuck said. "She put herself there. I just got out of the way and let her momentum handle it." "That's not how wrestling works," Robert said. "No," Chuck agreed. "That's not how wrestling works. Wrestling is choreographed psychology. That was something different. That was understanding leverage well enough that choreography stops applying. That was understanding the human body at a level where wrestling techniques become insufficient." NBC made the decision that night to delete the footage. The official explanation released to the press was that the match had been too brief and underdeveloped for their special. They said it had disrupted the narrative they were building about professional wrestling. They said they needed matches with more story, more development, more psychological buildup. The real reason was that they'd witnessed something that challenged too many assumptions about professional wrestling, about martial arts, about the difference between controlled performance and actual combat. They'd witnessed something that couldn't be easily explained within the framework of professional wrestling or even martial arts. They'd witnessed someone applying understanding at a level that transcended both disciplines, so they deleted it. The story moved through martial arts circles in Memphis and then across the country. By the end of that year, everyone in the karate community knew that Chuck Norris had faced Mae Young in her own ring and had done something so unexpected that NBC had deleted the footage. The story was told in training classes and in conversations between competitors. By 5 years later, the story had settled into legend. Now Mae Young had fought Chuck with all her skill and understanding. Now he'd demonstrated something that transcended wrestling. Now the reason NBC deleted it was that they couldn't explain it to the public. Now the story had taken on mythic proportions. What stayed consistent through all versions was the core truth. A legendary wrestler had challenged a legendary martial artist, thinking she understood the context. She'd been wrong. A master of wrestling had met someone who understood the human body at a different level entirely. 13 seconds was never going to be enough because it didn't take Mae Young 13 seconds to understand that she'd miscalculated everything. "Did that actually happen?" the journalist asked. "The story about Chuck Norris? I've heard versions of it for years, but I've never been able to confirm the details." Mae was quiet for a long time. She was sitting in a chair in her home, looking out a window. "It happened," Mae said finally. "The details have changed in the retelling. That's how stories go. But the essential truth is exactly as people remember it. I challenged someone thinking I understood the situation completely. I was wrong. I learned that night that there were people in the world who understood leverage and balance at a level that made wrestling training seem incomplete." "Are you saying he beat you?" the journalist asked. "I'm saying I tried to apply wrestling to someone who understood something wrestling doesn't teach," Mae said. I tried to control a situation using the tools I'd spent a lifetime mastering, and I couldn't. That's the story. That's the lesson.
Would you do it again? The journalist asked.
Mae smiled. No, she said. Some lessons you only need to learn once. I learned that night that there were people who'd studied the human body at a level that made my life's work seem limited. That's not a challenge I need to accept twice. The reason NBC deleted the footage was never officially explained to the public. The wrestling promoters who were involved said only that it didn't fit their narrative for the special, but everyone involved understood what had actually happened. A martial artist and a wrestler had met in a ring, and the martial artist had understood the context better than the wrestler. It wasn't brutal, it wasn't violent. It was just understanding something so completely that performance became irrelevant.
The kind of story that martial arts circles pass down without needing to verify. The kind of story that reminds people that the best martial artist isn't always the strongest. It's the one who understands how the human body works at a level so complete that they don't need to fight, they just need to respond. Whether every detail of that May night in Memphis survived the retelling exactly as it happened, nobody can verify anymore. The footage is gone. The television special was never aired. The match lasted 13 seconds and then became legend. But the shape stayed consistent through all the versions. A legendary wrestler issued a challenge. A legendary martial artist accepted it. 13 seconds passed. Something happened that couldn't be easily explained within wrestling's framework. Mae Young got out of the ring, Chuck Norris sat down, and NBC deleted the footage.